you guys?
Oh, I don't like. I mean,
You're not
see
even
me.
in. Just pretend it's not going. And then not
Yeah, should we
like,
scoot
Yeah.
together? Because Dylan and I are not seen on
You
film.
can't really see Dylan, but there you go.
There, you want to stick
Alright.
that in there?
Look at that.
Not featured.
Not featured.
I'm okay with
We're
that.
getting all nice and cozy here, right? I think that's good, right?
Oh, I feel like now I'm gonna get like.
You want me to?
I mean, the most important part is that they hear you, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, sure.
yeah.
I mean, you can kind of see you, sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm gonna move my bag.
Yeah, me too.
Resituate real quick.
Wait, sorry. I feel like you already said this, but first team, are you AF or nay?
Effort.
Okay, sorry. Or pro. Pro and con. Wrong words.
Did they say pro con for?
That's what it says on the ballot.
Oh.
It says it in tab room a lot too for PF, but not.
Yeah, because
Anything
it
else?
is more of a pro-con debate.
Yeah, it is weighing the pros and cons, I suppose.
So you saying half.
Also, your shirt yesterday, Kai would call it Afnan.
AFNAG, yeah, AFNAG.
Big.
Hey, I'm an LD, guys.
I started an LD, so you shut your mouth.
Kick ass, fake neg.
I love that shirt though. That shirt is amazing.
I'm ready when everyone else is.
Are you guys close-ish?
We're
Ready
good.
to go?
Yeah, I'm good.
Ready to go?
That's great.
Got out of time. This is interesting. I hope I'm not gonna bump the little microphone. Alright, everybody ready?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. Start my time now. We affirm uniqueness. A significant portion of American industries and daily life are powered by oil. According to the US HSR, American dependency on oil is the most severe in the world, and inevitably pulls us into costly resource wars. We use 25% of the entire world's oil supply, yet we only have 5% of the world's population. We use 20 million barrels of oil every day, 70% of it is for transportation. Much of this oil comes from foreign sources. Packer 22 laments that data from the US Energy Information Administration shows 65% of oil is produced domestically. The other 35% comes from international partners. Link 1, cars. Americans use cars as their main form of transportation. Richter 22 writes that 76% of American commuters use their own car to move between home and work, making it by far the most popular mode of transportation. In the United States, cars burn millions of barrels of oil annually. Walker 15 laments that in the United States each year, our cars alone burn over 2 billion barrels of oil and emit about 1.5 gigatons of carbon dioxide, 1/4 of all U.S. emissions. HSR will help take cars off the roads. Bigelow 22 quantifies that the Florida HSR project could eliminate 3 million car trips per year. Cars are overloaded and aviation is overburdened. Both of them are failing. Roads and highways should become the architectural renderings of how we connect these cities, and we ought to look at laying tracks in the middle or alongside them. It would take cars off the road. In a lot of cases, the right-of-way issues are solved. Highways of today represent an opportunity to put tracks down. That would dramatically lower fuel consumption. Joseph 22 explains that a city with many vehicles means there's a higher demand for fuel. Diesel locomotive engines also consume a lot of fuel, making them an unsustainable long-term mode of transportation. Countries would be required to import more oil to curb this demand, which increases the reliance and dependency on foreign oil. High-speed rails run on electricity, cutting down fuel consumption. When there's a high-speed train connecting several cities, people find no need to use vehicles, which lowers the demand for oil. This argument is empirically proven. House 14 finds a reduction in car travel in France and Spain, writing that the data presented by Giovanni indicate the creation of the French train line results in a 24% loss of market share for aircraft and an 8% reduction in car and bus travel. In Spain, a 27% loss of market share was observed for aircraft and an 8% loss for cars and buses. The automobile share of travel decreased by an average of 12% after HSR investments in France, Spain, and Germany. The best available models indicate that HSR will move millions of cars from the road each year in the U.S. The Center for American Progress estimated in 2010 that further, the Center for Clean Air Policy concluded in 2006 that a national HSR system could reduce the number of annual car trips by 29 million and annual plane flights by 500,000, saving 6 billion pounds of carbon dioxide emissions, equal to removing 1 million cars from the road each year. Link 2, aviation. A 2002 FAA report explains that every day aviation provides services to more than 45,000 flights. This requires enormous quantities of oil. The EIA quantifies in 2020 the consumption of jet fuel by U.S. commercial passenger flights was approximately 612,000 barrels per day. High-speed rail would provide a cheaper, less pollutant alternative. Ergon 19 explains that because high-speed trains prices are comparable, an ambitious plan to fight climate change would target air-speed travel high-speed trains roughly on par. High-speed trains can replace many short-haul flights. In fact, Park 2006 found the investments in high-speed rail in Korea have the greatest impact on aviation demand. According to the previous analysis, aviation demand reduced by 85%. And in Europe, Grade 20 finds that 80% of people choose to travel by high-speed trains on journeys. Link 3, investment. Climate change optimizes the tragedy of the commons. Nagata 2022 explains that the Paris Agreement's goal of limiting warming is still on life support, leaving almost 3.6 billion people worldwide vulnerable to climate impacts, with things set to worsen. These findings come amid rising fuel prices, high inflation rates, and the slow emergence from COVID. Impact climate change. Oil dependence is the root cause of climate change. According to a report compiled by the UK government in 2022, the main cause for climate change is burning fossil fuels such as oil. Burned fossil fuels release carbon dioxide into the air, causing the planet to heat up. Adam Vaughan explains in 2009 that cutting greenhouse gas emissions in half would reduce pollution enough to prevent 100 million premature deaths. EPA 22. In 2020, U.S. greenhouse gas emissions totaled 5,900 million tons. EDF 17. The current estimate of the cost of carbon is over $50 per ton. The United States spends $295 billion on greenhouse gas emissions every year. Thus, we affirm and strongly propose you affirm too. Thank you.
Or oh, sorry. What's your first name, really quick, before you start?
KHAIHY.
I don't know why my brain just farted. I'm so sorry. KH what?
AI.
AI.
Yeah. And then HY.
Okay. Cool. Then whenever you're ready.
Time starts. Now, hello, we negate the road solution for this reason. Contention 1, deforestation, urban sprawl. HSR will increase urban sprawl. Zoo 2021 cites that cities with HSR station tend to witness faster growth of urban built areas than city without HSR. This indicates that HSR as a technical breakthrough in modern transportation accelerate urban land growth. Zoo 21 explained that HSR exaggerates urban sprawl. Being connected to an HSR network on average leads to an 11.2% faster rates of urban buildup than those without. Thus, urban sprawl increased deforestation. Floss 2019 cited, even though the density of city means that we can take a relatively small amount of land, they can accelerate deforestation. Construction, HSR needs dedicated infrastructure. OTIL 2021 cited that high-speed trains require high-cost infrastructure to be put in place first. Unlike highways and airport, high-speed trains can only be used for passenger, making them far less cost-effective. High-speed trains require extensive infrastructure that must be built and maintained to be highly precise standards. This requirement for dedicated high-cost infrastructure is a problem. These systems are far more expensive to build than highways and can't nearly do as much. Infrastructure project cost deforestation. Yale 2020, a state of new mega project in development around the world will open up vast tracts of land to deforestation. According to the U.S. High-Speed Rail Association, a possible version of the United States high-speed rail system can expect it to be 17,000 miles. Impact 1, loss of habitat. One of the most dangerous and unsettling effects of deforestation is the loss of animals and plant species due to the loss of habitats. The trees provide shelters, also regulates the temperature. Deforestation can prove fatal for many inhabitants. Impact 2, increased greenhouse gases. In addition to the loss of habitat, the loss of trees also allows a greater amount of greenhouse gases to be released into the atmosphere. Healthy forests absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, acting as a valuable carbon sinks. Deforest areas lose that ability and release more carbon. Impact 3, water in the atmosphere. The trees also help control the level of water in the atmosphere by helping to regulate the water cycle. In deforested areas, there is less water in the air to be returned to soil. Impact 4, soil erosion and flooding. Further effects of deforestation include soil erosion and coastal flooding. Without the forest, soil erodes and washes away. The barren land which is left behind is more susceptible to flooding and specifically coastal regions. Also destruction of homelands. As large amount of deep forests are cleared away, the indigenous communities also who live there depends on the forests to sustain their ways of life and also under threats. The government of nations with rainforests in their borders often evict indigenous tribes before actual clear cutting begins. This is one of the preemptive effects of deforestation. And lastly, infectious disease. It's pretty well established that deforestation can be a strong driver of infectious disease transmission. The more we degrade and clear forest habitat, the more likely it's going to be find ourselves in these situations where the epidemic and infectious disease occur. Malaria, which kills over 1 million annually, has long been suspected of going hands in hand with deforestation. Cases have since been steadily rising in parallel with rapid forest clearing. In a complex analysis of satellites and health data, report a significant impact of deforestation across Amazon basin on malaria transmission in line with some previous research. Attention to high-speed rails proved to be ineffective. First high-speed rail projects hasn't been able to be completed. Nearly 40 years after the first one for high-speed rail in California proved, construction has not been completed in a single line. Second, HSL costs $4 trillion and won't help with travel. To make the United States the world leader in high-speed rail would add more than $4 trillion to the federal debt for construction of new rail, plus the tens of billions of dollars to annual deficit spending to subsidize operating costs. Such a high-speed rail network likely carry less than 2% of the nation's passenger travel and no freight. Lastly, there are many practical problems with the HSR in the U.S. America's greater decentralization, both in government and oversight, created massive approval and residential trend. The reason high-speed rail is such a delusional, and America just can't live close enough to downtown core. For the reason of ineffectiveness and deforestation, I urge you to vote for negation.
Are you ready for class?
Yeah.
Okay. I can time, or if you want to time as well. Okay. Time starts now. Would you like the first question?
Sure. In your first link, you said that 76% of cars on the commutes alternative to that is increasing in 2019, but none has been the cars. What makes you think that they're going to change from natural cars commuters to trains?
Can you restate your question?
Yeah, so in one of your links, it said alternative to like cars and stuff is increasing in 2019, but none has been cars. What makes you think that they're going to change, like those normal cars commuters going to change into?
Going to change to trains?
Yeah.
Okay, so, I mean, as our Bigelow 22 evidence states, that if we are increasing the track and having the infrastructure, that is what people are going to be wanting to use, especially if we see the environmental impacts that have been a great part of the importance of our
Those still
society.
needs to be built, right? Those train tracks still need to be built or not?
We have current train infrastructures that we can utilize. We don't have evidence for that, but that is a possibility. Can I have a question? For your Zimmer 19 evidence, I believe it's roughly in your third impact. You talk about the decrease in forest by about 3% because of malaria. Is there a direct link to just HSR in general from this specific evidence?
Yeah, because HSR causes deforestation. Because if you look back in history, there aren't really any project that hasn't caused urban sprawl. So with deforestation, that's gonna cause like further malaria due to clear forestation.
So there haven't been other projects that have increased urban sprawl?
No,
Is that what you said?
there hasn't been any other project that hasn't increased urban sprawl.
Okay,
Can
do you have evidence for that in your case?
No.
Okay.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Can our infrastructure withstand high-speed trains?
Our current infrastructure, as we've stated in our case, we would need to build, of course, to accommodate to the HSR lines, but as we've talked about, we have the ability to do that, especially with the plans that we're putting in place.
Won't that spread even more?
Spread more what?
Like, won't that cause more deforestation and urbanization?
Again, with our Bigelow 22 evidence, talking about how we can have these tracks on highways, we don't even have to go into other secluded areas. Since we're specifically going from a city to a city, there's already direct lines from a city to another. We can continue to use those pathways that we've found.
Can our train actually reach those high speeds?
Can a train reach what high speeds?
Can our train actually reach those high-speed rails? Because HSR is defined by like trains reaching a specific, I think, 212 miles per hour.
Right. I'm just saying, I'm not necessarily saying we have the track, but we do have the highway that we can utilize in the area without going into other farmlands or other areas to deforestize. Thumbs up. That was gross. Ready to go?
Yeah, you wanna put on your.
Yeah, we're gonna take some morning credit. Yep.
Okay.
That was a minute 22 seconds.
You wanna write that down?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I had the thing where you open your calculator instead of
Yeah.
your timer. Okay. Is everyone ready? Okay. Then I will begin my time now. So our opponents have their two contentions, right? They have their first one of their deforestation and urban sprawl, the second of high-speed rail being ineffective. So let's look at the first point that they bring up on their first contention of deforestation. This is not unique because they tell you that cities cause deforestation and they don't link in directly to HSR. And then B, with this, with the Florida plan as brought up in our case, you see that this urban sprawl won't occur because we'll be using the 46,000 miles of already made highway system, not just making own and adding into deforestation. It's going along with the infrastructure that's already currently in place. Now, moving on to their construction, looking at the Bigelow evidence, cross-apply that from our case, this explains once again that in conjunction with the highway system we have in place, we will be adding HSR rail or reutilizing current railway systems to accommodate. Now, let's look at their the stats that they've told you. They're non-terminalized. They tell you that HSR is going to be this very expensive project. They throw out a $4 trillion that it's going to cost, but there's no source provided by this. It's just that they state it's going to be $4 trillion to implement HSR. Also with this, they bring up the idea of a mega project. That's not quantified. They just say it's going to be this mega project and it's going to cause all these impacts, and they can't link into their climate change impacts because moving on to their 6 impacts that they have, they're all generic climate change impacts, and their only link into this is they say it's going to cause deforestation. But if you look at our UK 2022 evidence, you know that climate change, the #1 cause to it in emissions, comes from fossil fuel burning. And if we look to APTA 2022, we learned that implementing high-speed rail keeps billions of dollars in the U.S. economy by decreasing the amount of oil used by U.S. consumers. According to the International Association of Railways, high-speed rail is 8 times more efficient than airplanes and 4 times more efficient than automobiles. So you link better into climate change impacts through the affirmative world because there is a direct link between fossil fuels, the usage of those, and the climate change impacts that they're selling. So you must look to those 6 generic impacts going to the affirmative. Now, moving on to their contention 2, they tell you that HSR is ineffective, and but looking back at APTA 2022 evidence, you find that it saves 8 times more energy. And moving on to their next point, that California hasn't implemented this, that's using a singular study. But if you look at the Florida plan, which is more effective than this California generalization, then you'll see that HSR has the ability. Also, looking to the France and Spain evidence brought up by the affirmative, you see that there's a decreased usage in other forms of transportation, therefore better helping both climate change impacts and other impacts. In their evidence that they brought up also about California, in their same article with the Ban Ki-moon 2022, you find that also created jobs. So any economy point that they want to point out must also flow to the affirmative, looking as a benefit. Now let's do a little bit of impact weighing here. The net gives you the 6 generative impacts from climate change, but we've proven that the affirmative links better into those because the climate change is more directly affected by fossil fuels than it is by the deforestation that they haven't properly linked to. Now let's also look to the $2.5 billion in climate change from emissions that is weighed on the affirmative and the millions of lives that are also saved uniquely in the AF world. So if we're looking at an impact weighing, it must go to the affirmative, and stronger links are also preferred, must be preferred on the AF. For these reasons, I strongly urge an AF vote. Thank you.
A quick off-time roadmap. I will be frontlining, meaning I will go over my opponent's attacks on my case, and then I will begin to attack my opponent's case. Okay. Judge, you ready? Opponents, are you ready?
Yes.
My time will begin now. First, my opponents like to make the attack that we can actually build high-speed rails along our highways or on our highways. This is inherently false. High-speed rails need dedicated infrastructure. Because high-speed rail needs dedicated infrastructure, it triggers our first contention about deforestation. Because of the construction that high-speed rail needs with that dedicated infrastructure, that causes deforestation and causes all of our impacts. Next, they talk about how in their case, and how my article says that actually in California it created jobs. This is inherently false. Actually, HSR doesn't actually increase jobs in most areas. According to O2 in 2021, rail advocates argue that rail downtown to downtown times are competitive with planes, but this is only important where there are lots of downtown jobs. New York has 1.9 million jobs near Penn Station, and Washington, D.C. has more than 400,000 jobs near Union Station. So this argument may be valid in this quarter, but the jobs in most other American cities are far more dispersed, with an average of 8% of urban jobs located in central city downtowns, where many train stations would be located. Many major cities are also served by multiple airports, and when all the jobs and residences near those airports are counted, they can greatly outnumber those located in or downtown. This area around Los Angeles, Long Beach, and Burbank airports, for example, have twice as many jobs as downtown Los Angeles. Because of this, you cannot simply say that high-speed rails makes a lot more jobs than it actually creates if it's only in those downtown areas. It doesn't really help out most of the world. Now to attack my opponent's case. First, they bring about the point of oil dependency and how we are relying on oil. There is actually no significant reduction in oil if electric trains still rely on fossil fuels. A high-speed rail link between London and Birmingham is unlikely to lead to an increase in carbon dioxide cuts, or maybe even increase climate-changing emissions. There's the electricity to power the trains. Over 2/3 of the world's electricity comes from fossil fuels. So until power stations are weaned off fossil fuels, electric trains will have a significant climate impact. Not to mention that HSR will have a minimal effect on oil dependency. One of the most accelerated benefits is that reducing American oil consumption. This is a flawed notion that ignores the interconnectedness of global trade. If we were completely independent from foreign oil, we would still fund foreign militaries and place troops in these areas. The sudden lack of shipment from Saudi Arabia would cause major oil prices to shock globally. This is just merely Saudi Arabia. Even if we were completely free of oil, the use of raw industrial processes, we would still be gravely damaged economically, and since our economy depends on foreign trade, major economic recessions with our trading partners would cause the same problems here. The California High-Speed Rail Authority estimates that by 2030, high-speed rail systems will be saving 12.7 million barrels. But this is only 16 hours worth of the U.S. consumption in 2009, and it's only 1.9 of California's annual consumption. and it would have minimal effect on all of oil dependence. Not to mention that HSR will not reduce CO2 emissions, population density, and construction costs. A recent study by Booz Allen Hamilton suggests that the net CO2 emissions of the proposed HSR line would be greater than if it was never built at all. The study takes into account not only emissions during operation, but also when CO2 was emitted in the building of the new HSR line. The pollution from cranes and bulldozers, building new stations, and everything else, including laying down new tracks. So what this essentially is saying is, you see all their impacts on climate change ultimately turn over to the negative because we're actually not having a net benefit to high-speed rails. So because this is now, their climate change is not a factor, and you should prefer our impacts because we solve for climate change, and we also help with deforestation if we're not building high-speed rails. So because of the overall net harm that high-speed rails causes, I urge you to vote in the negation of the resolution. Thank you.
Okay, ready for cross?
Yes, I am.
Okay, you good if I 10?
What? Yeah.
Okay, I'll start that now then. May I have the first question?
Yes, you may.
Okay, so your attack on, well, your front line to what I said in response to your contention 1 was just that HSR needs its own infrastructure?
Yes, because there is no actual
So
evidence
what was
to
your
prove
evidence
that.
in supporting that it needs its own infrastructure?
So there is no evidence to prove otherwise, because we can't actually have infrastructure or any technology or any evidence proving that high-speed rails can go into our
Our
own
Bigelow
infrastructure.
2022 evidence is the one referencing the Florida plan that provides the explanation that it would be used in conjunction to the highway system.
Conjunction to the highway system doesn't mean that we necessarily can't build dedicated infrastructure to it. We still have to extend high-speed rails to that system.
Okay, so how is that uniquely causing its own urban sprawl if the 3 times larger highway system didn't already cause that?
So that argument isn't that high-speed rail causes urban sprawl deforestation. What our essentially first argument is saying is, if we would tend to build high-speed rail stations, more people will flock into the city centers. Because more people will flock into the city centers, this will accelerate urban land growth. Because urban land growth is exacerbated, it actually increases urban sprawl. These urban centers are now going to actually, increase deforestation. That is our entire argument there, not the fact that building high-speed rails actually causes that deforestation, but the city centers of high-speed rails will cause deforestation because the amount of people that will choose to live in
Okay,
those
so one last
areas.
clarification. What you're saying, your contention 1 means that urban sprawl is that it's just going to draw more people into cities?
Yes.
Okay. Would you like a question?
How long will it actually take to build high-speed rail?
Sorry, I'm writing that down real quick. I don't currently have a card on that. I could provide you evidence after cross if you would like. I can have my partner look it up.
Okay.
How long would it take to build high-speed rail? Okay, so in the meantime, sorry.
Yeah.
Look for. So in your constructive, your partner brought up that I would just like a clarification from the last cross. So are you guys saying that other systems have or haven't caused deforestation? Because there was just a bit of a mix-up.
See, other systems still have caused deforestation, but if we were to build high-speed rail, we would exacerbate this problem of deforestation and ultimately cause more harm than we can good.
Okay, thank you.
Ask another question. Yeah, so how many cars will actually decrease by, how much of the carbon dioxide will actually decrease immediately if we were to build high-speed rail?
Well, so immediately, if you're looking at our APTA, it talks about just the 8 times more efficient. I'm not necessarily sure what that 8 times, what the number is looking at the math on that. But if you look at this is Richter 2020, no, the Walker 15 evidence also talks about about the two, if you're looking at the Walker 15 evidence, in the United States, cars alone burn 2 million and they get tons, which attributes to 1/4 of that. And then if you're cutting that down by, I'm not necessarily sure an exact number on that. Is that what you're looking for as an exact number, or just rough estimate? Sorry. On how much immediately? Because you don't see immediate impacts with long-term projects like this, right?
So you're saying, so if we don't see an immediate impact, why should we start building high-speed rail if we don't see an immediate, that's time, sorry.
evidence that you wanted? Were you wanting it strictly from our case because we didn't have any evidence? on
I'm
our
just
case?
wondering how long it would be how long it would take to build.
Okay, do you want me to find that for you? That's what you want. I don't.
You know how none of us have researched this.
I haven't researched it. I can look it up for you. If you want me to look it up for you.
Okay.
According to the Cato Institute, they say about 2 decades.
I just was trying to get my.
Alright, 2
Yeah.
decades? Are we just gonna agree on 2 decades?
If you
Decades.
want to go from the Cato evidence, sure.
Sure, let's go. Let's go 2 decades then.
Okay. Good.
Can you tell us the week on this?
It's.
Yeah, we've only spent like a day on this.
I was gonna say, like, briefs probably aren't, like,
Like,
yeah,
no,
there's
they
no
don't
reason you'd be
exist,
arguing
right.
on briefs, yeah.
Okay. Is everybody ready? You good? You start? Okay, it's week off time roadmap. I'll be extending arguments and then going ahead and frontlining. I will start my time now. So to go ahead and start with our opponent's case on their deforestation point, as my partner brought up in her rebuttal speech, she's talking about how the HSR system is going to be specifically on highways, as our Bigelow 22 evidence states. Our opponent tried to counter this by talking about that actually we would need more infrastructure. When we asked them for evidence on this, in fact, they did not have any evidence, whereas we do have evidence stating, with the example of the Florida plan that they are building currently, that highways can indeed be built, that HSR rails can be built by or on highways. Now to continue with what my partners brought up in her rebuttal, when talking about the deforestation, their only link to this, they only have one link to their deforestation throughout their entire impact. Whereas with us, we have a direct example from the UK government 2022 that helping oil is the best way to help the climate. And our entire case is focused on oil and the effects that we see from that. When talking about our APTA 22 information that she brought up in her rebuttal, just showing that they will be 8 times more efficient. There's 8 times more efficiency when we transition to HSR. So in fact, we do see climate change impacts when talking about HSR. To also talk about their examples of the 40 years that it has taken for California to build in their contention to about being ineffective, we talk about in House 14 our empirical evidence about France and Germany and the effects that it has had on their economy. Now to go ahead and talk about some frontlining. So one of their arguments on our, specifically on our uniqueness, was talking about that there will be no reducement on oil and that the FSR actually does not help with the oil reducement that we see. This counters what we say in our case, which talks about with our Walker 15 evidence that cars produce 2 billion barrels of oil yearly, which in result turns into 1.5 gigatons of CO2. Their impacts specifically are talking about CO2, whereas we are solving the issue of CO2 by decreasing cars. As House 14 states, that there was a 12% decrease in cars from HSR when they transitioned in France and Germany. Now to go ahead and do a little bit of weighing. First, one of the big parts of this is climate change, since we both talk about this in our impacts. Our impacts, though, are quantifiable, as we talk about with EDF 17 and EPA 22, the $295 billion yearly that we are losing because of CO2 effects, and also from our Vaughan evidence of the 100 million lives that we can save by cutting CO2 emissions. This is a direct link to oil because of our UK government 22 evidence, which talks about oil being the biggest contributor to climate change and in result CO2 emissions. And when we're looking at scope, our 100 million lives are not specific to the US. This is global as we're talking about. And again, with US being a core of economics, we see this with the money that we're talking about, this affecting the entire globe. And in terms of magnitude, with our specified deaths that we have, in turn with our opponents' examples with no specified numbers that we can compare to. And also to talk about time frame, with our Vaughan evidence, talking about that we can incite this plan with CO2 emissions to 2050. Thus we affirm. Thank you.
Okay, some off-time roadmaps. I'm gonna be sort of defending our own case and then tagging and then do some weighing at the end. So my 3 minutes summary will start now. As for the link one in cars, Japan. One of the most popular example of HSR working, although Japan's lines are considered highly successful, today only 25% of passenger travel is by rails and nearly 70% by auto. And so building HSR will actually decrease any carbon dioxide or oil fuel use. The 3 European countries with the most high HSR rails are France, Germany, and Spain. Yet none of them seem rails reduce automobile or airline travel, but in reality is that airline travel in Europe has massively increased thanks to the introduction and expansion of low-cost air carriers. While data sources are inconsistent for early years, between 2010 and 2019, air travel grew 296% faster than air in France, 63% faster in Germany, and 26% faster in Spain. The graphic drawing in auto ownership showing that high-speed rail trains are not reducing auto driving or flying at all. In both Asia and Europe, aggressive construction of high-speed new rails are lined to make dent in flying. But building cars that are more energy efficient would do more than building high-speed rails, and we can see that high-speed rails aren't doing anything. Secondly, as they said in the cross-text, it takes 2 decades to build high-speed rails, but yet for climate changes, there's only about 20 years-ish left before we can reverse any of the damage. And so even if we build high-speed rails, it won't be in time before the damage will be irreplaceable, and we still have includes the time that people are going to switch over, because they're not going to switch over immediately. And secondly, into the infrastructure debate, saying that yes, we're going to use old rails and highway, but then you still have to destroy those old rails and highway to build those rails, because those old rails aren't built enough for high-speed rails. So you have to rebuild and explode them up and rebuild it again, causing even more infrastructure damage. And one of the link was that Florida has the ability, but it never exclusively state that they're going to build it. Having the ability and actually doing it is different. Like for California, they have the ability to do it. They should be building it. They're one of the biggest economy and biggest space, and yet they still fail against it. And so, as for Wing, with the 20 years that it takes to build HSR and that climate change will be irreversible in 20 years, building HSR right now won't do anything, but it's increasing and reducing the time that we have left with the irreversible climate changes. So building HSR won't do anything for us. And like my partner said in his oil reduction isn't, there's no reduction to oil in HSR as there are other causes like war and stuff. And so building HSR won't necessarily help us with the oil reduction. And that's why I urge you to vote negation.
Ready for Grant?
Oh, yes, we are.
Okay, you can-
Yep. Okay. Ready to start? Now, we have the first question.
Yes, you may.
So you just brought up the fact that in the next 20 years, like climate change is irreversible. So are you advocating that we do nothing and just let climate change kill us all?
So we're not advocating for that. Our essential argument there is that even if we were to build high-speed rails, it wouldn't be timely in order to see the effects that you're talking about.
So is this 20 years just like in the status quo? It's gonna end that, like it's irreversible at that point, or is
So
that,
even again,
or is it 20 years after HSR?
so you're talking about 20 years to build HSR. You're talking about 20 years to build HSR. Even if we were to start trying to reduce carbon emissions now, building high-speed rails would increase a lot of more emissions, meaning that we could even see a faster time before we reach to 20 years where climate change is inevitably irreversible. May I have a question?
Mm-hmm.
So you talked a lot about how we can build high-speed rail. We can build high-speed rails. You talk a lot about how high-speed rail doesn't cause deforestation, and you state numerous evidence that we can build high-speed rails on highway infrastructure. Don't we actually have to use vehicles to build high-speed rail networks that can emit a lot of carbon dioxide into the air?
We have to say, sorry, state the last part again, please.
So my question is, don't we have to use vehicles that use carbon dioxide emissions or emit a lot of carbon dioxide in order to build high-speed rail? So it doesn't matter if we build high-speed rail or
Do you
not,
have
but if we were
evidence that
to,
you have to use those specific vehicles to build high-speed rail?
is there any evidence showing that any high-speed rail would actually, high-speed rail would be built with energy-efficient vehicles?
The APTA evidence that tells you that it's 8 times more energy efficient than compared to the current system, both cars and airplanes.
Yeah, but
Is that with high-speed rail, or was
Yes,
that with
Yes, that is
the
a
building?
specific
That
reference
is
to high-speed
specifically
rail.
to high-speed rail.
But we're talking specifically about building high-speed rail here.
That's still about high-speed rail, either way.
Is that a net benefit, or is that the
Would you
benefit
like the
after we
car?
build high-speed rail?
because you can't use high-speed rail to build more infrastructure. You need cars, trucks, and stuff to build it.
Isn't that correct? You need more vehicles in order to build high-speed rail. Is the 8% after we build high-speed rail or before, like when we're building high-speed rail?
You need vehicles to do everything.
So are you talking about the
Think about what
short-term
you're
impact
asking.
of building it, or
Yes.
are you talking about, okay, so you're only looking at the short term.
I'm looking for the short-term and the long-term implication.
So we're looking at the long-term implication, where in the end, it will be saving money and saving,
Saving energies and helping the environment.
Okay, thank you.
okay, we'll take the remaining.
So
paragraph
it's
then.
is it 3 minutes or 2 minutes of prep time?
My ballot says 3.
3 minutes.
All right, sounds good.
So, yeah,
Yeah, well, we have.
we'll take whatever we got left.
Are you talking about the final speech?
Yeah.
Yeah, 3 minutes.
Oh wait, the final speech is 2 minutes.
Oh,
Yes,
sorry.
yeah,
I
yeah.
was like, we'll take whatever we have left before this final speech of prep, but.
4 for 3, 4 for 2, 2, 3, 2, 2.
I like my 4/8, 5 or 4/5s.
Oh, that's fine.
Everyone ready?
Mhm.
Okay. Then I will begin my 2 minutes final focus now. So the biggest part of this debate is boiling down to who links into climate change impacts better, right? That's what this all is going to boil down to. And with this, let's look to what my partner and I have stated that with our link 3 into investment, you see that the US, climate change is a global issue, right? Not one person, not one country can solve it, but the US has the influence to influence other countries. And with that, this idea of then they're going to further get other countries to invest in green tech. And if you look at our UK 2022 evidence in conjunction with our Bigelow 2022 evidence, you see that climate change, oil and fossil fuels are the biggest contributor to this, right? Who's going to link to this the best in this debate? And this is the affirmative, because if you look to our HOS 14 evidence, you find that the negatives try to tell you that people aren't going to switch. However, it is empirically proven with multiple countries, once again, our HOS 14 evidence, that people do switch, and that the long-term impact is better, and you need to link the climate change impacts from the affirmative. And we find with APTA that HSR is more efficient. It is. They're going to try and tell you it's not because of the short term, but it's a long-term gain. Now, let's look at a little bit of weighing here. Yes, everyone's going to try and weigh the exact same impact. So let's look at the link weighing. Whose link is more direct? What more directly impacts it? Well, if you're looking at just pure efficiency, HSR is more efficient than what we have in the status quo. Yes, it may be a long-term gain. That's how most massive projects are, and Rome isn't built in a day. You can't just fix something that took millions of years to become the way it is in, say, a year. You can't just look at the small-term impact. You need to look at the time frame here. And for these reasons, strongly state that the link from the affirmative to the climate change impact is stronger because it will decrease oil dependency, increase the investment worldwide, and that the negation's only link on this is that it may cause deforestation because people will move, and that these hypothetical, and for these reasons, I strongly urge an aft ballot. Thank you.
All right. Judge, I will use the remainder of my prep time, which is 3 minutes.
Cool.
Almost 3 minutes. Judge, you ready?
Mhm.
Opponents, are you ready? All right. My time will begin now. First, my opponent talks about how the way to win this debate is to see who links to climate change even better. The affirmative says that the aft should prove climate change better because in the long run, climate change will ultimately be better with high-speed rails. This is true. However, if it takes 2 decades to build high-speed rail, and it is only 20 years until the effects of climate change is irreversible, it won't actually benefit in the long run because what world is there if the effects of climate change are irreversible? If it takes 20 years to build high-speed rail, we really aren't seeing any of the impacts that the affirmative talks about. Second, even if you buy the idea that HSR will reduce auto usage in the flights, we still have to talk about the construction. The construction of high-speed rails will bring more carbon dioxide than it will reduce in the long run. So it might even cut our time to save the Earth from climate change even further. This proves that the neg actually links in to climate change better than construction because construction is a prerequisite to the benefits of what the aft is saying. Because of this, we see a negative ballot because of the fact that the aft doesn't really solve climate change in the long run. It still happens in both worlds, and even then, high-speed rails won't have enough time in order to see the benefits. Not to mention that on the point of deforestation, on our case, they dropped the point on urban sprawl. Because they dropped the point on urban sprawl, where more people going into a city center will ultimately expand out even more, causing deforestation, this triggers all 6 of our impacts, which outweighs most of their climate change impacts. Because of the non-uniqueness and the prerequisite of building high-speed rails, and because of the effects that deforestation has on the world, I see no other reason than to vote for the negation because of the detrimental effects it has on the people. Thank you.
Cool.
Some good stuff video. I feel like
Oh, yeah.
random stuff.